Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through the fiscal management cycle for Ontario as part of giving you an understanding where the current state of affairs for the financial statements for Ontario as we go into the 2018 election. A little bio about myself. I'm a CPA CGA by trade. I've got a wide range of experience from academia to industry to government policy work. A little summary. So I'm going to look at things at a high level. Frontline services, I'll talk about outcomes, I'll talk a bit about the Auditor General, but I'll give you kind of a high level view. So, two different groups of people have come out and spoke about the deficit. The Liberals said they were going to run $6.7 billion deficits for the next 4 years. What's not being said is the fact those deficits are actually been lowballed, and both the Auditor General and the Office, the Financial Accountability Office, have both said the deficits are closer to $12 billion. Now this is a little bit old, but it'll show you the only thing I want you to take out of here is that there's only been 3 surpluses since the Liberals took office, and nothing's been a surplus for close to a decade. This gives you an idea of the annual financial statements where the government projected this. But in most cases, nobody believes that what the government's presenting in financial statements is a clear picture of the exact deficits. I also want to bring attention to taxation. Wynne seldom ever talks about this, but they've introduced about close to $20 billion in new taxes and fees since they took office. So one has to ask yourself, is the money that going tax actually getting to frontline services? And I will show you that. Here's a good example of the misleading information for the Liberals led by Kathleen Wynne. So the old health accord basically allowed a couple things to have happen. And one of the things happened was it initially was 6% growth year over year. The federal government under Stephen Harper changed that growth to 3%, but the idea was it would be tied to GDP growth. The Liberals came to office under Justin Trudeau and said they were going to re-look at the mix. They decided to keep the same transfer agreement that Stephen Harper did. Now, here's Kathleen Wynne with this bucket of money. She turns around and only funded healthcare on average about 2% over the last 4 or 5 years. That means of the 4% coming from the federal government, it's going into general revenues used by Kathleen Wynne for her other government. You're not going to hear that from Kathleen Wynne. She's not going to tell you. She's going to tell you she's done well for healthcare in terms of absolute dollars. But what she's not going to tell you is she starved the system and not making sure that it's properly funded based on what she's been getting from all sources of revenue. The far right you're seeing is a hospital example where you're seeing that they're under direct funding has been pressured. So their operating costs are still growing, but they're seeing reductions in their funding. The far right gives you an idea of information that Wynne will talk about, whether it's wait times for MRIs, whether it's people sitting on a gurney in a hospital, whether it's nurses forced cuts because government hospitals are underfunded. You won't hear that. The other thing that I want to show you here as well is basically a blog here on healthcare. It just gives you an idea where some of the information, and I use multiple sources. Some of these sources are liberal friendly, some of these sources are conservative friendly, but it gives you a slice of what is basically happening. Education is another big area. I wanted to basically touch base on this because basically when the Liberals took office, one of the first thing they did was up the wages for teachers. And on top of that, McGuinty also brought in pensions, higher pension funding to 14%. That's not stuff you're going to hear about. The other thing you're going to hear about the Liberals talk about is how wonderful they've done, honestly, on the grad rates. Well, grad rates is a good stat to look at, but it's not the only stat you should be. You should be also looking at quality of grads, and that's something that we're still lacking. They're weak in math sciences, and they're weak in the soft skills, which are critical thinking, judgment, time management, interpersonal skills. The other point I want to raise here as well is Wynne's reforms by hiking the minimum wage so dramatically over 2 years. She's actually caused a downturn in terms of the jobs being exited from some of the small businesses. I was a student once. I worked part-time in a grocery store. A lot of those jobs are going to see hours cut and all that. So that was my first start working. Wind's making it very hard for businesses to hire people. A little bit about education, again on the pension. Just quickly here, in general, the private sector funds at 4%, and most of their pension plans are defined contribution. The government at times funds up to 14% matching, and those pensions are defined benefits. Defined benefits mean it's guaranteed, so there's more risk to those funds. I want to show you post-secondary school again. The government transfers were 3.1%, when only funded at 2.3%. So it gives you a good idea of what Wynn's been doing. She's playing games in terms of saying she's doing something in absolute dollars, but she's not really telling you the complete truth. Skilled trades. We got a lack of shortage in the skilled trades. The college they created has become nothing more than a boondoggle bureaucracy, which has done very little to move us forward. Job Prosperity Fund. Instead of going after the significant challenges from carbon tax to hydro rates to regulation to user fees and other taxes, Wynn decided as a stopgap point is just give money to profitable companies to basically look like she cares for manufacturing, but she's not. It's really a stopgap because she's not prepared to make the systemic fixes that's required to support a growing economy. Hydro rates, which is another fallacy that Wynn won't talk about. In other words, she basically took period costs, put them into debt, and basically taxpayers are still going to pay for those fees just over a longer period of time. The other thing that she won't tell you about is that FIT's been a complete colossal failure. The Hydro 1 board changes in terms of compensation she's not touching. It seems to me that she talks a good story about Hydro, but really, Hydro's in bad shape and she doesn't want to deal with it. The last point I want to talk about you to do is I encourage you to read the Auditor General reports. The Auditor General reports are very good to give you a kind of where the waste is, and it also, she's objective, and not what I mean by that is her goal is to highlight things. Okay, so she's not working for anybody other than trying to get the clear picture. So this is the things that you need to be aware of in terms of government focus when you're asking a question, when they're going to eliminate the deficit. At one time, Wynn made a promise that she was going to reduce the GDP debt down to a 36% range. We need to rework compensation grid pension reform. We need to reduce regulations that are stifling business. We need to fix hydro tax in the grid. Carbon tax was never required. Wynn needs it because she needs the money to fund her operations. We have a broken government system that's too big, too unwielding. It was done purposely for Wynn to have more votes than really looking at streamlining processes. We've got a broken arbitration system that's not based on ability to pay, so we haven't really fixed that. We need to reform taxation in terms of how we look at corporate, business, personal taxes and all that. We need to look at key investments. That means infrastructure. That means also looking at how we support resource-based things. How do we attract manufacturing jobs back to Ontario? Opening up the procurement process. The current process basically is very restrictive. In other words, there's not a lot of oversight into it, and also the things that we've seen here, some ridiculous costs because of the way the procurement process works. We've got a lot of government offices, so the next government will have to look at how we restructure government, including how we manage the assets of real estate. And we need to support economic growth in both north and rural areas. Thank you.